Photographs are a powerful tool for change. Focusing on climate-related rural water challenges, this podcast episode shares experiences and challenges of using participatory photography to improve trust and mutual understanding between rural communities and local decision makers in Ethiopia. I'm Dr. Catherine Grasham, and I'm a social researcher at Oxford University. I'm joined today by two other experts. I'll let them introduce themselves.
My name is Alice Chautard. I'm a knowledge exchange and communication expert, particularly interested in photography.
I am Tadesse from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, a humanitarian photographer.
So maybe we can start by talking about why photography is such a powerful tool for change. I'd love to hear both of your perspectives on that.
All right, I'm happy to jump in. Thanks for the question, Catherine. Well, let me just maybe start by saying that I think the science itself is absolutely critical for change. But we know often that facts and science on its own isn't really sufficient to communicate key message and really get through to people and encourage change. On the other hand, when they're accompanied by images and stories in particular, that can be a much more effective way of communicating those issues. And the reason for that is that our brain is wired to process visual information much quicker. And also, I think it taps into the emotional aspect of our brain, which helps us not only understand certain issues faster, but also remember them. So I think the two combined, photography with communicating scientific or real issues on the ground, can be a really effective tool.
It's a form of communication. It just highlights the issues more clearly, easily, and accurately. It just connects audience and people to the issues that we're trying to highlight. So definitely a powerful tool to use it for social change.
And as a follow-up question from that, I guess I can ask everybody here is why participatory photography? So just a little bit of background. We've been leading a project in Ethiopia using participatory photography. So maybe I'll throw the question to all of us. Why did we choose participatory photography?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, participatory research methodologies are usually used in contexts where to bring about some kind of change towards social justice. So as a researcher, that was definitely my motivation for using participatory photography. And I suppose in terms of finding out information for research purposes, participatory photography is a relatively well-established method. But what we wanted to do was to use participatory photography as a tool to support knowledge exchange between rural communities and decision makers.
And it just gives participatory photography brings the collaborative effort between the researcher and the community. There's a direct collaboration. Plus, it gives ownership to the community that we're trying to do a research on, and it just gives the mic, the platform, and it's definitely empowering to bring communities to tell their own stories on their own language.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, Elise, what do you think is the difference between an outsider going in to capture photographs rather than community members doing it themselves?
Yeah, I think there's maybe two differences. One is for the community themselves. Sometimes coming in as a foreigner can be quite an extractive process. You just come in, you take an image of someone and then you leave. So that instead of being empowering for someone who features in a photo, it can feel like quite an extractive process. So there's almost a bit of a power shift when you give the camera to the local community. But I think in terms of practical aspect as well, you by giving cameras to local community members, they obviously know better than you what the issues are. So it may give you access to a full spectrum of issues, and that's more embedded in their day-to-day lives.
Yeah, just to add a few points on Alice. Well, my fear was that even as a photographer, right, had I been the one to photograph the issues around water in that community, going through the pictures, they were part of me saying, oh my goodness, I would never have thought to have taken this picture as a photographer, you know? So it's because they live the life, they see the challenges every day, and they know what part of the challenges they are facing much, much better than me as a photographer who's just there to observe at a quick glance, you know, or a half-day trip around the community. So I'm very impressed with how they have observed those challenges, the everyday challenges, and made sure that those stories are included in the photographs.
So I suppose with this project, that's what we really wanted to get at, is how are people in the community being affected by water insecurity and climate risks, and how that may potentially play out in the future.
But I wonder, Catherine, maybe you can give us a bit of an overview of the Fentale district and you know, your own research and what it's found so far on the water and climate risks.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. So yeah, the district is really, really interesting. So it sort of sits in the middle of the OUCE River Basin, which is the most developed river basin in Ethiopia. And it sits on the regional border of the Oromia region and the Afar region. And the climate there is sort of semi-arid, and most of the people that live there are agro-pastoralists, which means they have small land holdings and quite large numbers of livestock, which they rely on for their livelihoods. And one of the really interesting things about this district from a water perspective is that there's a lake there called Lake Baseka, which is actually connected to the OUCE River. And the lake has been expanding for quite a long time, and it expanded significantly, where it's covered a railway line, large areas of the town, and it's swallowing up agricultural land as well. So there's huge efforts going on to understand why this expansion is happening, what interventions can be done. And alongside that, there's also, because the OUCE River runs through the district, there's also floodplains as well. So where agricultural land sits on those floodplains, it's at risk of annual flooding and unexpected flooding as well. And then there's areas where it's very dry, where water is very scarce. You also have issues from upstream in the OUCE, where there's Addis Ababa, which is the capital city, and industrial development, which is causing pollution downstream. There's quite a lot of water quality issues as well. And also, if I think specifically about the two rural kabeles where participants from this project live, the households in those communities have a really, really tough time getting water for use at home. So for drinking, for cooking, for washing. There are rural water supply systems that don't operate very well. People often have to travel very long distances to collect water. And those risks come from a combination of things, not just from the poorly functioning systems, but also from the quite challenging climate as well. So as we know, water security and climate change are intimately connected. And under future climate change, there's going to be much more pressure on water resources, and water insecurity issues could potentially be exacerbated if there are not appropriate interventions to sort of anticipate these climate risks. Yeah, and I mean, Martha, you've got loads of experience of doing participatory photography projects across Ethiopia. Maybe you can give us a little overview of how the project worked on the ground, from selecting the participants right through to the exhibition.
So the project was documented between two kabeles, and we had 3 women, 3 men from each kabele. And there was a training on storytelling, basic photography, mobile cell phone photography skills, and definitely on consent and ethics. And yeah, they went to first we did a taste, like a photo walk for them. So they took pictures of their surrounding just to make sure they understood the training, and it was wonderful to see the result. And of course, they went and documented the water crisis, the consequences, the hazards in their surrounding, and it was wonderful. They did a lot more than my expectations, to be honest. And yeah, they went around, they did go to town, they made sure each issue is covered. And it's also wonderful that we have different age gaps, so they had different perspective, different lens, different story to bring in. So it was diverse issues has been covered through their photography work.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I suppose when I think back to the first time I visited the communities in the Kabeles, which is, so the Kabele is the Amharic word for a sub-district. So it's like a particular area where a community lives. Yeah, when I think back to 2017, the first time I went there, and the kind of questions I was asking in my interviews to try and capture the different water security or climate risks that the community members were experiencing. And then I look at the photographs that the community themselves have captured. There's quite a big difference in terms of the information. And I feel like the photographs offer much more nuance, much more diversity, much more context. Elise, it makes me think of when we went in 2018 and you took some photographs while you were there, and just how much you noticed your photographs and the community's photographs were quite different.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's two ways in which they're different. One is the kind of issues that are captured. I think when we went in, we were mostly focusing on floods and droughts and water scarcity, and also water issues within Metahara town. But what these images have revealed is, again, much more nuanced. So they came back with a lot of images around water quality, you know, having to bathe and use water that isn't clean, but also I remember there are some images of cattle drinking water from water that was contaminated by a factory. So these are a lot of these details, or how flooding had destroyed homes and had led to people moving into shelters, floods destroying infrastructure, and a much more visual way of representing all those issues. I think some of the images that I captured, and that's my second point, is that I probably captured those issues of floods and drought in maybe a bit more stereotypical way you would as a foreigner photographer, whereas coming from the local participants' perspective, it's a fresher way of portraying these issues.
So Martha, I was thinking about, you said that you went into the community and you selected the participants, then you trained the participants in collecting photographs, and then the participants were left for some time to go and collect photographs. What happened after that?
Yeah, I think it's also important to highlight that I did not directly select the communities. We worked with the local admins for each kabale or sub-district. So they know their community and they knew who could potentially participate in this participatory photography. So yeah, I did the training and gave them a few weeks to go through their pictures. They we collected 10 pictures from each participant, and yeah, it was wonderful, like I said earlier, to get the results. The deliverables were very diverse, different areas, different issues that they've highlighted, and well, with right after we collected those photographs, we selected the top 3 to 5 images from each participant, and we did an exhibition, a photo exhibition in Matahara city. And it was more of a workshop where participants were also there to explain, to talk about their photographs to different individuals who attended the workshop that are stakeholders from government and non-government organizations. And that's also very powerful, and why I always encourage participatory photography. Usually these discussions happen at high level with government and non-government partners talking about different development issues, but to actually have participants who actually know the issues, the social issues or development issues that they have in their community, to be able to speak directly with government and non-government organizations. That was very powerful and something that we should encourage in our research. They were very happy, you know, taking ownership to the issues and discussing. They had a lot of questions to the stakeholders that were there, and yeah, it was a half-day event that we had, and it was a very productive session.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's so important to bring these perspectives, well, for the rural community members to tell their own stories about how they're adapting to climate risks, to community, and to local stakeholders. Because what we often find happens is that interventions to mitigate climate risks from local government come, as you said, come from the top down and are not always context specific. So what these conversations can really do is make sure that local decision makers are aware of the local context, the different challenges in the different areas. So as I said, you've got one community that's at risk from flooding, one community that's at risk from water scarcity. Even within a small district, you can see quite a lot of differences at a very small scale, and making sure that those experiences are included in the decision-making processes is just really important to prevent maladaptation, you know, where incorrect interventions are actually going to increase vulnerability to climate risks as opposed to sort of remove that vulnerability. We really wish we could have been there at the exhibition. It looked absolutely fantastic, and
yeah, it would have been great to have you both at the exhibition.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that really struck me about the photographs when you sent them to us was actually how beautiful they were, with the colours and the composition. And I don't think I'd really expected that, because I mean, you used relatively basic cameras, right?
Yes. Should I say I'm a good teacher or no?
Yeah, definitely. But I'm just thinking, because at least that's something you've been thinking about as well, this kind of the aesthetic of photographs and how important that is for storytelling.
Well, actually, is it that important? I mean, to what extent is it important, I guess, is a question. Because if you compare, you know, their own, the images from the participants to images from a top professional international photographer, you know, maybe they were not to that level, and yet they were still, as you say, they were still beautiful and telling and sharing a lot of stories. So where do you put that bar of aesthetics? I think it's a real question.
So even though, like you said, it's not really about the aesthetics, even though, I mean, water issues, as much sad as the story and the issue is, it's usually colorful because of the jerry cans, water, trees, you know, those are the elements that usually are involved in those photographs. But my fear was that it would end up being lots of jerry can pictures, you know. There's always that assumption, right? Okay, I give training, my expectations are this. But They not only did an amazing job, it was just so powerful to receive all kinds of pictures surrounding water issues. They've covered, I don't know, I don't think personally, I don't know if I feel like, oh, I wish they have covered this, because really they have really covered everything that they see in their community.
And maybe we should also say that we developed surveys to ask the decision makers. So they were interviewed before and after the exhibition to find out more about what they learned, what they took away from the session. And one of the things that came out is, I mean, obviously they know the area very well, but they hadn't gathered the diversity of issues that the two Kibeles faced and how different those issues were in the two places. So I think what I think is really interesting is that it was very useful for the decision makers as well as for the participants. And we hope that this process helped build trust between the two parties. I mean, obviously this project also left us with many questions, and it's one small project, and we're not trying to say that one small participatory project is the solution for everything, but there's certainly some takeaways that we can learn from this project. I wonder if either of you want to add anything about learning positive and negatives that you've had from the project.
Yeah, I think just to build on what you've said there, yeah, it was really interesting that the stakeholders recognised those kind of different climate risks across the district. And they also got a lot more awareness about why interventions that they've put in the community to improve water security perhaps haven't been so successful. And one of the big takeaways for me was also that the rural community members actually came away feeling as though they understood the work that the stakeholders are doing much more. Yeah, and really understanding that a bit more, that those decision-making processes, and then I suppose our hope for the future is that that can go some way towards enabling better accountability mechanisms, but that's yet to be seen.
Yeah, from looking at the project, I mean, it was very productive. I feel like there was a lot of good collaboration between stakeholders and the community. I think from the workshop, even after the event was over, the participants had a one-on-one with the stakeholders, which was wonderful, to have their voices directly share their reflections with the stakeholders. So it's my hope that that conversation continues and that there will be a tangible or practical change or solution to the community. So the other side of it is, of course, the what's next. Okay, we did a great research, a great participatory photography project with the community, but then what does it mean? What's next for the community? What are their expectations after this research? So that's something I kind of question, but of course it's not to be looked down at, however we have achieved through that collaborative effort regardless.
Yeah, really good point, Martha. And I think also when you do participatory projects of this kind, you engage the community so much, they give so much of their time. And as you say, they probably have quite high expectations of what next. And it's always hard when, you come in to manage those expectations. And obviously we want there to be change, but there's so many factors that can't be controlled. At a larger scale, at a regional scale, at a national scale, at an international scales, how many of these participatory projects can we do? How can that information then trickle back up is at the national level and then be brought at COP26 and other, for example?
Elise, we've got some plans in the work for sharing this project.
We put together an application to feature the work at COP26 at the Water Pavilion that is organized by SIWI. So we're preparing some material at the moment that will showcase the project at COP26 in very little time.
I guess we really hope that these photographs and the story of this project can help to really shift some of the conversation towards adaptation and resilience, because the bulk of climate funding at the moment is spent on mitigation. So yeah, we're really hoping that it's going to raise these issues and draw some attention to that.